Harriet last night, the marvelous prayer work that we did at the end of the service last night, where you were talking about, where we all had candles, and she was saying that sometimes in this movement, and forgive me, I'm going to paraphrase it, but it was like we forget that the discipline is about getting up every morning and choosing health. Rather than getting up in the morning and dealing with our disease, to get up in the morning and choose health. To do the things that need to be done by us. And it's that simple, and it's that profound. And this morning what I want to do is I want to share a story with you. I travel all around the country and speak at Unity and religious science churches, and about a year and a half ago I was at wonderful Unity Church up in Palo Alto, California. And they had this wonderful center and this great courtyard, and I had spoken there about a year before. I've spoken there probably 6 or 8 times. Stan and I think we'd met each other once. We talk on the phone a lot, and then when I go, he's always gone. You know, that's how it is. That's why it's so wonderful to come to a place like this and get to meet some of the ministers where I've spoken at their churches. But anyway, so I did the first service and was out in the courtyard, and they have an hour between services, and I was out shaking hands and giving hugs, and mostly hugs. And it was getting towards the end, and I thought, well, you better go in, and I carry those little, cards with me that you peel off and go like this. So you better go in and get in front of the mirror and get all the powder and, stuff off you and get ready for the next service, And so I started towards the door to the back of the church. And as I started that way, and most people were gone. Most people were gone. And all of a sudden I felt this tug on my arm, and I turned around, and this woman about this high said, "I need to talk with you." And my first thought was, why didn't you come get me a few minutes ago? I'm ready to go back in now. But I didn't say that, needless to say. I had my Believe Me suit on like this morning. Dark, subtle stripes. I read the book. And so I turned around with my smiley face, and I said, "Yes, what is it?" And as soon as I turned around, I saw this little person about this tall grab my leg like this. And my first thought was, oh, I hope that he didn't have any chocolate cake. Because there was this huge chocolate cake for a birthday party. But I didn't want to look down because, So I said, yes. And she said, I was at your workshop when you were here a year ago. And she said, you're right. Some of the things that you say are confrontive. She said, I'd never had somebody stand up in front of me and say, I do not come before you today as a truth student. I come before you as a Christ. She said, I never had anybody look out at the audience and say, I want you to know that I do not approach you as if you were students. I approach you as if you too were a Christ. She said, I know. She said, we even sang the song that morning, that I am the radiant life of God. I am the love of God, the peace of God, the strength, vitality of God. But she said, I sing songs like that, but I had never had anybody stand up and say, therefore I'm a Christ. And she said, you stood right there and said that. And she said, you stood there and talked about your healing. And that, she said, one of the things you said was that, in your opinion, people use the idea of being a co-creator with God as a cop-out. They go try, and if it doesn't work, then they say, well, that must be part of God's plan for me. And she said, you stood right there and said, God just loves you and lets you pick the game. That when Charles Fillmore said God gave us choice, he didn't say God gave us choice except when he has a plan for us. And she said, you were confrontive. And she said, what I remembered when you walked, one of the things you said was that you and I do not have to change. We do not have to change. We do not have to become worthy. We don't have to forgive enough, let go enough, open enough. We don't have to do anything enough for the infinite power of God to back up our belief system. That it already does. And that if we believe in want and sickness and lack, then the infinite power of God will create that in our lives. And she said, I'll never forget it when you stood up there and said that some of the metaphysicians you know ought to paste Velcro on the back of their hand and Velcro in the middle of their forehead, so when you walk up and say, so how are things, they can throw their hand up and it'll stick. Oh, I'm having wonderful opportunities for growth. And then she said, you made fun of all the books I read. You stood right up there and said, we're so busy today dealing with our dis-ease that we forget that we're divine. We forget that we're God expressing uniquely as us. We're all walking around with these labels. We're the adult children of alcoholic parents, a product of dysfunctional families. We're terribly codependent. We have to be careful of our small self because it'll lead us astray, and our saboteur within, which will separate us from our good, and the ego, which will separate us from God. And we get up in the morning and say all that stuff and then look in the mirror and say, and I'm powerful. And this little voice goes, And she said, it just smacked me right in front of the face. And I'm sitting there thinking, I need to get in and give a talk. And I wonder if I have chocolate all over my leg. And she says, shortly after you were here a year ago, my son got sick. And she said, my husband is a big shot in Silicon Valley, and we have a wonderful health care plan, and we took him to our doctor, and they couldn't figure it out, and we took him to specialists. She said, over 6 months, my son had more and more severe symptoms and got sicker and sicker and sicker. And she said, we prayed. We sent in the Silent Unity, and they prayed. We had a prayer group in the church. She said, I've been in this church and I'm active, and by golly, we got behind it. And we amassed our resources towards his health. And she said what happened was his health deteriorated and deteriorated and deteriorated. And she said at first everybody was saying, don't worry, we can beat this. You know, the infinite power of God backs up our consciousness. All things are possible if you believe they are. Nothing is impossible to those who believe. One person with God is a majority. She said everybody said that kind of stuff. But she said as the sickness progressed, like you in your sickness, I got confused. She said, Terry, in 1 week, people came to me in love and in support. She said, we got letters and cards and suggestions and it went on. But she said, in 1 week, I got the 7 habits of highly effective people, the 4 levels of healing, the 9 spiritual principles, these are books, the 9 spiritual principles for getting everything you want, 8 weeks to optimum health, the 4-fold way, the 7 spiritual laws of success, 5 steps to selecting the best alternative medicine, and the 7 stages of power. And she said, do you know that those books don't agree with one another? And she said, I tried to read them. I thought, I'm his mother. I have to take some responsibility. He's only 1.5 years old. And she said, I got confused. I didn't know where to turn. At first, it was so simple to just declare a new reality. But as time progressed and the illness persisted, I got confused. And she said it came to a head a few weeks before. They were moving down and they finally diagnosed my son that he had Crohn's disease. And she said it's very serious for a child. And I don't know about that, but she said it's very serious for a new child. And she said then a friend came, a friend that I've known for years in church, and came and sat and we prayed together and talked together. And at the end of that afternoon, my friend, we were sitting there and she said, you know, perhaps we have tried so hard, we have been so focused on creating health. Perhaps this dis-ease that your son is experiencing is something that he chose before he came here. And that the reason he picked you as his mother was that you are strong enough to be by his side as he goes through this learning process that he's going to do with disease, because we know how disease can be a wonderful learning process. And she said, I wanted to say, no, I don't believe that. But she said, this was a friend, and she'd been in it a lot longer than I had, and she'd read a lot more books than I have, and she said, so I just said, well, I don't, you know, and I'll think about it kind of thing. And she said, when my friend left, I was absolutely enraged.